In 1619, the first African slaves were brought to America, specifically North American colony of Jamestown, Virginia, which was founded in 1607. Jamestown was the first successful permanent English settlement in what was to become the United States. In the beginning, plantation owners originally had to replace their indentured servants every few years after they were freed. Colonists realized that buying African slaves was a lot cheaper, and these slaves could even be kept longer. Tobacco was easy to grow in Virginia. It had been growing very popular at a very rapid pace. Colonists realizing this also realized the fact that harvesting all the tobacco themselves would be merely an impossible task. Therefore, these colonists turned to slavery. The captain of a Dutch slave ship had brought these slaves to Jamestown in 1619 and had traded them for food. The farmers would also trade tobacco for these slaves. It was a very harsh cycle. The slaves were immediately taken off the boat and were put to work already. Not only was this cycle harsh, but the working conditions the slaves endured were horrific. It was obvious that the Negro servants were treated differently than their Caucasian, indentured allies. Imagine working from sunrise to sunset and being torn from your land, culture, and rights. Slaves received little food and were punished by whipping, shackling, hanging, beating, and other cruel punishments. Some of the masters did these things just to show their dominance over these slaves. Slaves yearned for their freedom and had discovered the system that led them to it. The Underground Railroad was the slaves' plan to escape to the north. Many Northerners thought that slavery was terrible. These Northerners began to hate the South and joined in on helping the slaves escape through the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad was a secret network organized by people who wanted to help the slaves escape to freedom. All slaves, men, women, and children, were being helped to escape. The Underground Railroads were actually neither underground or even railroads. These escape routes were called that because these activities had to be carried out in secret with darkness and/or disguise. The first step to successfully escaping to freedom was first to escape from your slaveholder, which wasn't easy because if your master found out you were missing, a sizable reward would be put on your capture. Federal marshals and professional bounty hunters would look for these escaping slaves as far as the Canadian border. If you were captured, you were sent back to your slaveholder and there would be a cruel punishment you would face. Some slaves were punished by beating and were sent farther north, lowering their chances of escaping again. The unlucky were hung or killed in many other ways. The journey to freedom was especially difficult if you were a child or a woman. Women who were escaping often had infants and they were not going to leave them behind, so they would take them on the risky journey to the north. The songs of the Underground Railroad had hidden meanings like where to go, when, what rivers to follow, and it told the slaves to always keep their eyes to the north, where the freedom was, under the Drinking Gourd. The Drinking Gourd is also known today as the Big Dipper.
Follow the drinking gourd.
Other hidden meanings also played a huge key role in the process of escaping. The towns on the routes had codes. For example, Seville, Ohio owned the code number 20. Hidden meanings would often be portrayed in songs like Follow the Drinking Gourd and in quotes. It was up to the conductors, also known as people who helped the slaves escape to freedom, and the slaves to decode these messages in order to proceed safely. Safety was much more important than speed in this journey. During this trip, there would be many stops to places known as stations. These stations were safe houses to prevent the slaves from being captured. The slaves and their conductor would only stay at these safe houses when it wasn't safe to proceed. When it was safe, the journey would begin again to the next safe house. It was an ongoing process that led to the freedom.
I have no accurate knowledge of my age, never having seen any authentic record containing it. By far the larger part of the slaves know as little of their ages as horses know of theirs, and it is the wish of most masters within my knowledge to keep their slaves thus ignorant. I do not remember to have ever met a slave who could tell of his birthday. Frederick Douglass, 1845.
William Still, one of the well-known Underground Railroad conductors, aided as many as 800 slaves to escape to freedom. Throughout Still's life, he not only fought to abolish slavery, but Still also fought for African American civil rights. Still was often called the father of the Underground Railroad. Before Still would help the slaves escape to freedom, he would interview each person and keep careful records, including a brief biography and destination for each. Still did this in preparation for the future when the separated families were able to be reunited. These records were carefully hidden in a book called The Underground Railroad.
What I ask for the black man is not benevolence, not pity, not sympathy, but simply justice.
Frederick Douglass, born into slavery and had 2 failed attempts to escape slavery before successfully escaping on the 3rd try. Douglass was a well-known national speaker. He traveled throughout the North giving vivid first-hand accounts of slavery, abolition, segregation, and discrimination. He was also a well-known conductor on the Underground Railroad. Thomas Garrett has been called Delaware's greatest humanitarian, and it has been said that he has helped more than 2,700 slaves escape to freedom. Thomas and his family hid slaves in their home and helped get these slaves one step closer to freedom. As Thomas once said, "Friend, I haven't a dollar in the world, but if thee knows a fugitive who needs breakfast, send him to me." Samuel Burris, a free black man, conducted fugitives on the Underground Railroad through Delaware's free black communities. Helping slaves to regain freedom in the state of Delaware is a crime next to that of murder, if committed by a colored man, said Burris. The consequences of this crime when committed by an African-American man was very severe if they were caught in the act. He'd be sold into slavery for a period of 7 years. He was caught in the act and sold into slavery, unfortunately, but he aided many of the other slaves, so the punishment wasn't as bad in his eyes. Imagine escaping slavery for a moment. The relief you feel after years of being trapped in a terrible place where you work long hours with little food to line your stomach. Imagine risking everything to go back to save people you have worked with for a period of your lifetime. Some may be family, others friends, and some you may have never associated with. Scary thought, right? Harriet Tubman is one of the most famous, well-known conductors on the Underground Railroad. She not only escaped slavery on her own, but she also went back to aid others out. As soon as Tubman crossed the line into the free state of Pennsylvania, many thoughts scurried through her head. When I found I had crossed that line, I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person. There was such a glory over everything. The sun came like gold through the trees and over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven. By the 1860s, Tubman had made at least 19 trips into enslaved states, risking her life and freedom for others. Tubman aided hundreds of slaves throughout her lifetime. Overall, she was an amazing contributor to the Underground Railroad. Conductors and many other notable people played a huge key role in escaping. They were the backbone of the whole Underground Railroad process. Without all of them, the number of slaves that had escaped would have dropped immensely. Different conductors worked in different areas of the route. The conductors were free individuals that provided the slaves with a safe passage to and from stations, and other notable people helped in various ways. The Underground Railroad was a true success.